Jamie, get Spotify on the horn. Jamie, have you ever used Spotify? I don't know what it is. Spotify, have you ever eaten elk meat? Spotify, you gotta try intermittent fasting, dude. Spotify, it's entirely possible that aliens exist. Spotify, have you ever been in a triangle choke? Spotify, have you ever been in an arm bar? Rogan sold out. What am I gonna do with all my kettlebells? No, Joe! You understand me. We'll get through this. This week, Joe Rogan announced a huge licensing deal with Spotify. The Wall Street Journal reports that it is worth more than $100 million based on incentives and performance metrics. And this agreement means that by the end of 2020, Spotify will be the only place that you'll be able to find the full audio and video episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience. Will the move work? Will the Joe Rogan Experience die? Is Spotify trying to be more like YouTube or more like iTunes? Let's just think about this a bit. First off, this deal is absolutely ginormous. I mean, it completely blew my mind when I first heard the news. There's so much business wrapped up in this. You have a huge amount of money changing hands. You have Spotify doubling down on their investment in podcasting, and especially their investment in proprietary audio and video content. To me, this is Spotify stepping up from a music streaming outlet to be more like a media conglomerate like iHeart Media, except they've got 10 times the market cap, but this is an investment in a business model more like Netflix. I honestly think this is a huge inflection moment for podcasting as a medium. We all know that podcasting has grown into a big business, but this deal is a benchmark. And based on the spike in Spotify's stock price since the announcement of the deal, people are listening. Like I said, I was taken back when I first heard the news of this deal. Initially, it really didn't sound like Joe's style to put restrictions up for his listeners or to corral all of his content in one place. He's always been about spreading content around and just uploading a tremendous amount of content and letting everybody access it for free. I mean, the guy was live streaming podcasts in 2010 on Justin.tv. That's light years ahead of the curve. But then I realized maybe he's ahead of the curve on this deal too. I mean, it sounds crazy to me that he's going to put all his content on one platform, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me. I mean, his video content has pretty much only been available on YouTube for the last few years as his popularity has exploded. And Joe has been really frustrated with YouTube that whole time. He's had lots of problems like most creators have with YouTube's automated copyright claim system, and it got to the point where Joe wouldn't even show any videos or images on his podcast. He would just describe to the audience what he was watching or seeing or talking about. Listeners didn't suffer much from something like that, but I'm sure it annoyed Joe plenty that he couldn't produce his show to the level that he wanted. So now Joe's hosting his videos on a streaming platform that isn't YouTube. YouTube has got to be so nervous about this deal. I can only imagine what their offices were like this week when the news dropped. So the video will be on Spotify, which is a big switch from YouTube, but that user experience should be about the same. I mean, free app, you go on, you press the button, and you watch the Joe Rogan Experience. I think even bigger than the video switch will be the audio switch. Previously, you could find the Joe Rogan Experience on any podcasting app like iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, wherever you want. But now the only place to find the audio podcast will be Spotify. That's a really big loss for all of those other podcast outlets and a really huge push for Spotify to become a major player alongside iTunes in the podcast market. Whereas Spotify kind of lagged behind the biggest podcast outlets, now they have to be considered if you're comparing any of them. And when I was thinking about big money in the audio radio realm, I realized that this is the Howard Stern situation all over again. If you're a little younger, you may not recall when Howard Stern made the switch from terrestrial radio to satellite radio. But it was 2004 and Howard Stern had the show that was too hot for the airwaves, and satellite radio was making a big push to become a new standard. And Janet Jackson just lost her top in the middle of the big game halftime show, and CBS got a $500,000 fine, so everyone was kind of cagey at the time. Increasing content restrictions motivated Stern to leave terrestrial radio and famously sign a 5-year exclusivity deal with Sirius Satellite Radio. The show reportedly cost Sirius $100 million per year to produce. Stern had his own channel where people could listen to Stern's live show and reruns 24/7. So the Joe Rogan Experience, shifting from a very accessible, widespread platform to a little more curated kind of premium service, is just like Stern going from radio to satellite. Rogan is a big enough tentpole that I am confident this will be a fine move for the show. Commenters are going nuts, saying that the show is going to die. It won't. It's going to remain one of the most influential media outlets in the world. Even though Joe explained that the show will be available in full for free on the Spotify app, Spotify still has kind of a reputation as a paid service, and the most hardcore fans have been freaking out about the switch. They're gonna lose their comment section, and that is a big loss for the fans, but I really don't think it affects the quality of the product overall. The comment section was never Joe's thing, and that was a YouTube thing. And comments are going to crop up about Joe Rogan Experience episodes in other places on the internet, like Reddit. There'll just be, episode discussion threads where they talk about stuff. I know lots of Rogan's most hardcore fans are very upset about this move, but personally, I'm excited about it. In terms of the quality of the show itself, I'm excited because with a more stable cash flow and what seems like full creative freedom and a lack of YouTube's restrictions, Joe might make a better show, or at least have a better idea of what he can put out without worrying about copyright strikes. Worst case scenario, the Joe Rogan Experience stays the same, and this rattles YouTube a bit, and the competition is good for consumers. Or maybe Spotify will become the HBO of podcasting, which is something that Stitcher wasn't able to pull off, but we'll think about that later. The podcast will still be free, and this is competition for YouTube, and I mean like serious competition for YouTube. Depending on how Spotify shapes their future content rollout and support, Spotify could become a very real YouTube alternative, or even more like a Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max alternative, depending on how seriously they're going to dive into video. And when you look at Spotify versus those other video streaming outlets, you see how Spotify is blending some of their models and the freemium model. Spotify bought the podcasting company Gimlet and Bill Simmons' The Ringer, and those channels and their shows are now products of Spotify, whereas the Joe Rogan Experience agreement is specifically a licensing deal. In his announcement on Wednesday, Joe made sure to specify that he will not be an employee of Spotify. They want him to continue making his show however he likes it, and they'll just provide a home to host it. They're just happy to be the only home on the internet for a podcast that gets more than 200 million listens and views per month. It's not publicly known how long this licensing deal is good for, but judging from the numbers we went over in my previous video about Joe Rogan's income, my guess is that this deal is going to last for the next 3 to 5 years. In my previous video about Joe, we knew that the Interactive Advertising Bureau estimated the income of his podcast in 2019 to be about $30 million. I'm hearing estimates of at least $100 million to a rumored $168 million for the deal with incentives. So, like Stern's first deal he signed in 2004, I think this is likely a 5-year deal. As I said before, I think the Joe Rogan Experience will weather this switch just fine, and they're possibly going to improve. I'm a fan of the show, and I'm really excited to see what kind of support Spotify gives the podcast. Spotify could become much more widespread after this if they continue feeding their proprietary content machine with more exclusive deals. That's going to be key. I mean, this will get Spotify on each Rogan fan's phone, but they're going to have to pull together a bit more of a spectrum of content if they want to be a new premium standard for audio entertainment. I hope they can continue the growth, and maybe that will light a fire under YouTube to get some more creator-friendly policies in place. Podcasts are forecasted to be a $1 billion industry in 2020, and in agreeing to this deal, Joe's made a decision that will be felt throughout all of podcasting and could very well shape our new streaming media landscape. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with a friend who you think would enjoy it as well. I know this news really stood out to me, so I hope you found it interesting. Let me know in the comments down below if you think the Joe Rogan Experience is going to thrive on Spotify, or maybe the golden years are behind us and now the show's just going to stagnate. Let me know down below. Follow my Instagram for more frequent updates about what I'm reading and what I'm thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and be sure to slam the like and subscribe button so that I will see you guys in the next one.